Pleasure to be here tonight, and thank you for joining us. I don't want to take a lot of time talking about me, but I want to introduce Cleave Simpson, Colorado State Senator, represents the San Luis Valley, represents a broad swath of eastern Colorado, southern Colorado. So we're going to talk to Cleave tonight about his first year as a state senator. I want to get his thoughts about what that was like for him to go from a private citizen to a public official. And then I should introduce my wife, Mary Ann Talbot. So we're just gonna get going, but we're gonna let Cleave ask us questions, because I think it's important in what Mary Ann and I do to explain ourselves or to talk about ourselves in case there's any questions like that. Alamosa Citizen launched on August 8th, and we've been publishing every day since then. And we can talk a little bit more about Alamosa Citizen as we get going this evening. So, Senator Simpson.
Thanks, Chris. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here, and for full disclosure, Chris and I have known each other more than 40 years. So we graduated high school together 42 years ago, along with my wife, Kathy, who's here with me, and Kim. We were all classmates together. Virginia's here. She was a year older than us. Not much older than us. But anyway, it's great to be here, and appreciate Chris and Mary Ann and this opportunity to kind of engage with the community. It's really a challenge to try to figure out, so my district is 16 counties, it really goes from the Continental Divide to the Kansas border, so it's 300 miles from Creede to Campo. Easily the largest legislative district in the state. But before we get to me, I would like to take the opportunity to inquire with Chris and Mary Ann a little bit about, what inspired you to go down this path, and the Alamosa Citizen. I'd be interested to know what inspired you and what kind of your expectations are. Where is this going?
I'll let Mary Ann answer that.
Because I love public speaking. Excuse me. Part of it, Chris and I are long-term daily newspaper journalists. His career goes back a little farther than mine, but we both worked in daily newspapers for years and years and years, and they were very community-driven. Like we did, making funny noises. He doesn't like me.
Just not so close. Not to do so.
Not so close. Okay. So that's just sort of in our life, in our blood, and we at the whole newspaper landscape. I'm sure, just even as a casual reader, you've seen how it's changed from being these. I think Chris should talk. These robust things that are just full of everything that you would want to know about your town, to getting thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. And so we just felt like there was a need here for not just daily news about crime and traffic and all of those kind of things, but the kind of things that really engage a community and get that connect people and pull them together. So not just politics, but just the fabric of what's here, the culture, the history, the arts, the people. And so that's just what we're going to be covering. We want people to feel like they're part of this place and be a thread that connects everybody.
So AlamosaCitizen.com is our answer to daily journalism in the 21st century. Like Mary Ann said, we come from long newspaper backgrounds, but we know that newspapers have been shedding staff going back to really 2004. If you look at the number of job loss in journalism from 2008 to present day, there's been about 3,000 or 30,000 journalism jobs. About 28% of that workforce has lost their job since about 2008. The one area, though, that has been growing jobs in journalism are daily publishers, digital daily publishers, digital platforms like AlamosaCitizen.com. No print, no newspaper, pure internet-based, digital-based community journalism. And that's what Alamosa Citizen will strive and attempt to do, is practice community journalism. So we see this as an answer to a more robust local news presence for the San Luis Valley. And that's what we'll work each day to make sure the Citizen is connecting and telling stories that are rich around the San Luis Valley. We've had long conversations with Cleave since Marianne and I moved back to Alamosa in 2016, and we've talked a lot with Cleave about the Rio Grande Basin and hearing the condition of the Rio Grande Basin, experiencing ourselves the changes in climate, long-term drought that the San Luis Valley has experienced going back to 2002. The Rio Grande Basin, the environmental nature of the San Luis Valley is something that we felt needed more attention, needed to help people understand the threats to the environment, the threats to the ranching and farming industries of the San Luis Valley if we don't figure out the Rio Grande Basin. And that was an impetus for us launching the Citizen, is we wanted to tell the story of the Rio Grande. And we'll continue to try to tell the story of the Rio Grande as consistently as we can. So that was a big reason from a topic, one of the reasons why we jumped in this.
Well, again, I have a bit of a bias, but I wish you the best of luck in your endeavor. And I think, at least from my perspective so far, it's been a wonderful product. And again, I have a little bias about water as well. So I know those articles written on behalf of the Citizen have showed up in the Springs Gazette and other places around the state. So appreciate your highlighting the challenges and opportunities and the work that's being undertaken here in the Valley. It's greatly appreciated.
Just really quick on that too, and so the story that's right here, that was one of the first stories we published, the threats to the Rio Grande. That story has appeared in the ColoradoSun.com, which is a statewide digital publishing group, and has quite a bit of readership at the digital side. And then it was published this weekend by the Colorado Springs Gazette, also their version of Denver, the Denver Gazette. That's all coming out of Colorado Springs. And so when we, Alamosa Citizen, when we can tell a story and then it gets picked up across the state of Colorado by the major statewide newspapers, that's the type of work we want to do. And we're able to share these types of stories simply because we know the people that run those organizations. And journalism is no different than any other profession. It's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know. You got any other questions for us?
No.
Good.
We're going to talk the whole night.
I want to start with Cleave on redistricting. So the Colorado Independent Redistricting Commission has been working since even before the 2020 census came out, but they've been working to redraw both state Senate districts that Cleve's in, state House districts, and then congressional districts. So we did print out for us tonight the latest redistricting maps. To my right is the 3rd Congressional District map. This map is the 3rd version of a staff plan. This map, if it doesn't get changed by October 1st of this week, this map will get sent to the Colorado Supreme Court for adoption as the state of Colorado's new congressional districts. You'll see changes from the 3rd Congressional. The commission itself has a chance to change this map this week. If they don't change this map and submit it to the Colorado Supreme Court on October 1st, then this is the map that gets submitted.
Yeah, this has been quite I don't want to call it an experiment, but Colorado voters approved ballot initiatives Y and Z to really set this process in motion this year. So this is the first time an quote independent commission is crafting these new legislative and congressional districts. So it's been really interesting to watch this process unfold. And they were here in Alamosa, I don't know, a month ago or so, and was fortunate enough I went and sat and really intended to listen more than speak, but I did offer one consideration for them, and they have a handful of criteria they have to evaluate when they're setting these districts, these draft maps together. But the one that really strikes a chord for me are the communities of interest. And so I was really trying to highlight with them, and look, I didn't have to do this. Everybody in front of me that spoke already hit on this, but water was one I asked them to really take focus and an interest in, about communities of interest. John Wesley Powell years ago actually had proposed drawing state boundaries based on watershed boundaries and not how we ended up with, you know, a rectangular state of Colorado. And it would have been a really interesting, I've seen what a map would have looked like based on watershed boundaries, and it was really interesting. But it was amazing to me how many people spoke at the commission here about that concept and the value and the importance of communities of interest and water. So from the very beginning, even the very first map drawn without census data really kept the San Luis Valley together. So that was another key point expressed, was keeping the valley together. And the first map actually had us, the San Luis Valley, with the Eastern Plains in what would be Congressional District number 4. This map, and plus there was a map floated not via the commission, but a proposed map that created like a southern district, really focused on watershed, the Rio Grande, the Arkansas, the San Juan Chama. But it didn't, how do I phrase this? It wasn't mindful of what it did to the rest of the state. It created a really interesting district, I think, for southern Colorado, but it really would have created for us a district with one rural congressperson, and I thought that was problematic. Matter of fact, I spoke to the commission to do everything they could to create surely 2 purely rural districts, which is nearly impossible to do here because of the population centers being, you know, focused between Pueblo and Fort Collins. So, and look, I very intentionally have stayed out of the redistricting process to let people express their ideas and their perceptions and their communities of interest, and have shared with Chris. I feel very honored and privileged to represent the folks of Senate District 35, but in reality you represent all of Colorado when you're at the state capitol. So I'm happy to again work for the folks, no matter what the district looks like. And the Senate districts are to the left here, which are really an interesting process that they've come through to basically take Senate District 35 that I represent now, which is again the San Luis Valley and everything east to Kansas. The proposed map now they're considering as the San Luis Valley and everything west to Utah. I go, I thought when they would do this, they would tinker around the edges a little bit and change. I was fully expecting to gain another county as populations across Senate District 35, the 16 counties that are there now, 8 of them lost population in the census data. The other 8, 7 of them had marginal increases, and Pueblo had a reasonable increase, but I knew they were going to have to add population to the Senate district, but I never envisioned they would flip this on its head and take the district and move it all the way west. But again, I campaigned on the thought that I think we all want the same thing. We certainly have different opinions on how we get there, but you know, we want prosperous communities, safe communities. We want a future for our children and grandchildren. I don't think we differ that much in expectations and what we want out of our legislators and our representatives. So looking forward to however the map ends up. So
clarify for us, if you're right now in 35, this map on the second version puts us in 6. So you would have to run in that Senate district when your term expires, and you wouldn't be an incumbent because your current district gets sent to Pueblo.
My current district gets sent to, the number. Yeah. The number shifts to the proposed map says Senate District 35.
So there's a current senator in 6 now, right?
Yeah, but I'm not sure how they sequenced the numbers. That was the other comment at the district commission. I said, please don't change the numbers. At least, if I'm in Senate District 35 now, there's no reason to not keep it as Senate District 35. But they didn't pay much attention to that.
That's what I'm trying to understand, is if he's no longer the senator of Senate District 35, because that's now covering Pueblo, and we're now in Senate District 6, if that's the way it shapes up, and there is a current senator in Senate District 6, where do you run? What do you do?
Well,
that's what
in
I
this
was trying
state, you have to
figure out.
live in the district that you're running in. So I would run, I'm not sure terminology plays out, whether I'm an incumbent. I'm certainly an incumbent. I'll take a step backwards. So when I was elected last year, I served for 4 years. A term is 4 years in the Senate. So I'll be in the Senate through the next 3 years and then run for, if this map holds up, I'll run for a seat in Senate District 6 if my wife lets me run again.
So my other interest here, though, and I want to get rid of the Senate District. Why don't you run for the 3rd Congressional and represent the San Luis Valley in Congress?
I've been in this role for 8 months. I haven't even figured out where all the restrooms are in Capitol yet. I'm interested in serving, what the folks elected me to do, and then we'll see what unfolds in the future. But
I have another. I've planned Cleave's life out, and I say that with all seriousness because I think Cleave, and yes, we're good friends. We are. I think he is the type of public official that the state of Colorado, the San Luis Valley, and the United States of America need. I think he is. And I say that not because he's Republican, not because I say that because he's honest. He is true. His word is true. And honestly, I don't think you can say that about everyone that is in public office today. Mike Yon, yes. Lori Lasky, yes. I'm talking at the state and federal level. And Cleave, to me, is one of the bright, political, rising stars in the Republican Party in the state of Colorado. And I think he should run for governor of the state of Colorado. That's just me.
all right, thanks, friend.
All right.
Move on.
I want to talk about the transportation bill that was passed in your first legislative session. You voted against the transportation bill, but you probably knew it was going to become law, and it was signed by the governor, and now it's law. And it is a massive bill.
163 pages.
Okay? And it got a lot of money in it. So I want to talk about how it gets funded first, because I don't know that people understand how the state transportation bill that was adopted in the last legislative session, there's a ton of good stuff in it, how you pay for that. My understanding, and Cleve's going to tell, is state gas tax, the legislature adopted higher rates for the state gas tax.
Yeah, but they're fees, not taxes. So
Whatever. Fee,
Because-
tax, a fee.
But words have meaning. So in the state of Colorado, you can't tax people because of Tabor without their authority.
So they call it a
They
fee.
called it a fee.
It's a tax. That's just the way politics works.
In the bill, that was what was challenging for me, was there were actually 4 new different fees to be collected through an enterprise, 4 different enterprise funds. So we've been operating under Tabor for 20 something years, and the mechanisms are there. If we want to raise taxes for whatever purpose, if it's for infrastructure and roads, I'm a conservative Republican and feel like that's how we should do that, not through the legislature. And to Chris's point about, we've now created 4 enterprise funds that receive fees, not taxes. And so there's a new fee for gas and diesel, on-road tax diesel, that will start 2-penny increment in 2023 and 22.
Yes, sir.
And for 4 years, there's a 2-cent increase in the gas fee to fund that enterprise fund. So over the course of the next 4 years, there'll be 8 cents more on your gas and on-road diesel. And I got up on the floor and argued about how regressive that fee was, not just economically, but geographically. And it's kind of weird to think about. I tried to convince my counterparts about just living in rural Colorado, which every bill I either vote on in committee or on the floor, I try to filter through that rural Colorado lens. Well, what does this mean for rural Colorado? And trying to help our urban legislators appreciate just living in rural Colorado. I have to drive more miles just to live because of how we are geographically organized, and it becomes, again, regressive and from a geographical perspective. So there's, fees for gas and diesel. There's fees now for delivery, Amazon or Uber. There's another fee assessed to that. There's another fee for.
So so when you order from Amazon, it's going to cost you a little bit more because of the transportation bill that went up.
Rideshare was the other.
When you call for Lyft or Uber, the state's going to levy a fee on you, so that's right. It's going to cost you a little bit more, so they can pay for transportation projects. So that's generally how you're going to pay for this.
Yes, that's how the state's going to pay for this. And I mean, it's a fundamental change in how we purport to fund transportation. The other one that occurred was there are increasing fees for electric vehicles as well. Like I think right now it's just a flat. You pay $50 a year to register, or there's a fee, an added fee of $50 for electric vehicles with no escalator in it, and the legislation adds an escalator to it over time. So those are the pieces that generate revenue to fund. I mean, it had a lot more in it than just roads and bridges, which was the other challenge for people of conservative mindset. Is that a question?
So let me ask.
Yeah, does the state get any of the federal highway user tax fund?
Yes.
But I know a lot of it, I know it's proportioned out to the counties, but the state also receives some for their transportation projects?
Yes. I can't tell you how it's appropriated, Pete, but yeah, and then on top of that, the other big discussion during the session was we knew there was potential federal infrastructure stimulus coming, much like there were CARES Acts and ARPA Act dollars coming too. So the discussion centered around why the necessity to add these fees to folks and potentially drive up the cost of living here when we know those conversations are happening in Washington about a federal stimulus infrastructure package.
So this is a $5.3 billion package that got passed, got adopted. Now we're going to pay for it, $5.3 billion. There's a lot of backlog projects but I want to ask Cleave, what projects do you think, or how do you, as the state senator, how do you move forward to say, how's the Valley going to get some of those road projects? How's the Valley going to get some of that? And living here, you'd be a little concerned because a lot of this bill was aimed, or a big cost of this bill was a front range rail system, and I love rail. But it's not going to help you in the San Luis Valley because you got to get over to Vita Pass to catch the rail. You know they're not coming this way. So what's in it, from your perspective, do you think, for the Valley?
Well, there won't be anything specific in it. It's a matter of working with CDOT and their priorities by region. I think there are 7 CDOT regions across the state, and they have a running, project plan and a strategy list that just stay engaged. I personally just stay engaged with CDOT through their legislative liaison to see where, in a grand scheme of things with this pool of money now, I know what the priorities are in this region. say that, but I can't actually repeat them because I don't remember.
One of the priorities we just got done, and it took, I think, Mike Young like 10 years to get done. That's that
Highway 160.
Yes.
Oh, that was Darris.
So
Darris
that
takes
did
all the
get
credit
through,
for
and
that.
they did do that interchange on the east side of Alamosa. You saw that, but that took years to get the money to come through from CDOT.
Well, it will, I mean, the effort comes from local persuasion plus legislators just sitting on the doorstep of CDOT and go, this has to be a priority.
Yeah.
And that's what, you know, Representative Valdez and I would have to do on a routine basis to try to make it a reality.
But then you have other responsibilities. You have other communities that you're responsible for. So how do you balance those different community needs when you're trying to get each of your communities some of that money?
Flip a coin. It's really again about trying to stay engaged with county commissioners across 16 counties to go, where are your priorities, so I know what their individual priorities are, and then an abundance of time at the Capitol is about trying to find balance. You know, whether it's road and bridge and CDOT or some other spending avenue or priority. We're a state with limited funds. Again, we very intentionally said we want to limit the growth of government. So every year at budget time, you have to sit down and kind of prioritize where do you think those are. And there's an interesting story. I think we're going to talk about behavioral health here in a little bit.
Yeah.
So.
But I just want the audience to get a sense of how difficult your job is to represent such a broad region of the state. I mean, not difficult. I mean, it is difficult.
It is difficult. I've shared. I think I was telling Pete before we started. I'm averaging right now putting 4,000 miles a month on my vehicle to try to get. Well, I'm on 3 committees, so I'm back and forth to Denver twice or 3 times a week, and then trying to get to Lahana and Lamar, Trinidad and Pueblo, and again. Really, for me, it's been a learning experience to try to figure out how to stay engaged. It's just the logistics of, again, 16 county commissioners and sheriffs. I haven't even stopped to try to count how many municipalities there are. How many mayors am I trying to stay engaged with? There are 45 school districts in Senate District 35. There's only 170 in the state of Colorado. 45 of them are in Senate District 35. 6 district attorneys. There's just this laundry list of, okay, and me not serving in the legislature before. I didn't have ambitions of being in politics or a state legislator until a couple years ago. So it's been a learning experience for me to how to really stay engaged with that broad spectrum of stakeholders and community interests. Again, in a swath 300 miles long by 100 miles wide. And I will honestly tell you, I haven't mastered it yet by any stretch of the imagination, but about the time I'll get it figured out, they're going to flip it and I'll have to go, but the model should still work, but it'll flip and go west.
So Cleave, on this transportation bill, are they going to issue debt to pay for that?
No, Rob, there's no authority to issue any debt, so it's just pay as you go. Right now, I mean, there was a ballot initiative 2 years ago, a bonding proposal to go into debt to fund, significant transportation projects, and the voters said no. I know there was some political shenanigans around how that was structured, but the short answer is no debt secured to do this.
Emma, you got a question on transportation you want to ask Cleave? Okay. Just want to make sure. One of the benefits of you traveling, and you've really seen a lot of the state, particularly the eastern portion of it. And I want to ask you, when you think of your full district, what do you see as the status? What is the state of your district? Where are we? I mean, is the valley different than what you're finding on the Eastern Plains in the Arkansas Valley? Is Lahana, Ordway, Palomar, Swink, is that any different than what you're seeing in Alamosa, Monte Vista, Conejos, Antonio? What's the state of your district that you see right now? Where do you think things are?
To generalize it very much so, as it's, the whole district is challenged. Again, I referenced declining population across Senate District 35 makes it difficult. And people, you know, we talk very generally about the urban-rural divide, but legislators at the Capitol have reminded me that's not a myth. That's reality. And you could see it unfold in some of the debates on the floor this year. But I don't think we're that dissimilar, the San Luis Valley and the Arkansas Valley and the Southern Front Range. Pueblo's a little bit different in it has so much economic activity and growth within the city itself that part that I represent, I think, benefits from that growth. But, you know, I have routinely talked about the reason I got into this was to have a voice for rural Colorado, to make sure, I think we run the risk of being even more marginalized going forward than we have in the last decade or two, and trying to be thoughtful and engaged up there to create a system and an environment where we remain relevant and resilient going forward. Again, with declining populations, it gets harder and harder. Most of the Senate district it's all dominated by agriculture, and most of it's dominated by irrigated agriculture. And the other thing, serving in as the general manager of the Rio Grande Water Conservation District, that afforded me an opportunity to be involved in a number of statewide, water issues and discussions, and you could just see the writing on the wall to go, the state's population is expected to double by 2050, and we're in declining water supplies, and you can see the writing on the wall that goes, if we're not really thoughtful about this, you run the risk of fundamentally changing what Colorado looks like. And I mean, the San Luis Valley doesn't exist like it does today, or it has for 100 years, and the Arkansas Valley and the Wet Mountain Valley all follow suit and go, there's tremendous pressure on agriculture, there's tremendous pressure on rural Colorado. It manifests itself in a lot of ways, and we get to talk about this, but I see it in behavioral health issues and suicide rates and death by overdose rates and opioid impacts.
You're like us. We lived in the cities. You lived in big cities. You and Kathy, you lived in Houston. You lived in metropolitan areas. When you left Alamosa in 1979 and you went to Colorado Mines, and then after Colorado Mines you went and had a big engineer, and you were in big metro areas. And they get treated and are seen differently than small towns, rural markets in state to state. And now you're back in a small town rural market, just like we did, and we lived in big cities. And to me, there's a very noticeable attitude when urban suburban looks at rural, and they look down at you, and they talk down to you. That's my personal feeling. And I wonder how you, as a rural legislator, if you notice any of that, see any of that, or what you think if there's a growing divide between the rural part of Colorado and the Front Range.
Well, look, I haven't experienced that at the Capitol. I think there's a genuine sense of wanting to make sure rural Colorado stays relevant and resilient, but I think my urban counterparts tend to forget that or lose that. That there are so many bills that come through that go, this will be really, and don't pitch it to me, they go, this will be really good for rural Colorado. It's like they want to make sure rural Colorado is relevant and resilient, but when it comes down to it, and I don't think it's intentional, but I think they just forget. You get so focused on, those big economic drivers in those urban centers. But I haven't experienced it yet where there's disdain or looking down on rural Colorado. They routinely again talk about, here's a chance to help rural Colorado, but it's like it doesn't have the follow through or the consistency or the
So they just pay lip service.
Yeah, to some degree. We certainly passed bills I thought were helpful. That was the biggest kind of surprise or opportunity for me when I was elected in November. We were on the heels of the state had just trimmed their budget by $3.2 billion. And there was an expectation that the next legislative session would probably have to trim another $1 billion out of the budget. So I get elected in November, and then there are economic forecasts that come out in December. The economic forecast comes out in December, and it looks a lot rosier than what the last forecast had done during the middle of COVID. And actually during the session, it improved again at the next quarter and the next quarter. So instead of debating and working on a budget that cut $1 billion out, it actually had another $1 billion to spend, actually. And so as a fiscal conservative, it was a little hard to go, you know, what I'd really like to do with extra revenue, extra state income tax and sales taxes is pay down debt. You know, the state has a number of certificates of, I lost the terminology.
Obligations.
Certificates of obligation, an abundance of deferred maintenance on assets that the state owns. Like, why don't we fix everything that we own already, put away a sizable chunk for the next challenge we have, or quote, spend it all. We didn't actually spend it all. The state did put forward a budget that had the biggest reserve they've had maybe ever, $1.8 billion in reserve. But that did afford me the opportunity to be part of discussions about $30 million for watershed restoration projects, $30 million to support agriculture, $15 million to support the Colorado Water Plan. And water and ag, I was all over those for the whole session. And I went up there thinking, legislators you have the ability to sponsor 5 bills. And then above 5, you have to get permission from leadership to sponsor 5. I went up there really thinking, I don't know if I'll sponsor 2 bills, 3 bills. I ended up sponsoring 20 bills that all passed, and the governor signed every one of them.
It's a lot of
I'm not sure
bureaucracy
that's
you're
good
creating,
or not.
Mr. Simpson.
That's a lot of government.
One of the things, and I think this is just a quick point here. Most people get lost in these big numbers. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars in government, state government, local government. We're talking billions of dollars. It's hard for your average Joe to grasp that. It's hard when you're dealing with your own little family. When your government's talking billions and billions of dollars, I think that's where we start to lose context, understanding, and it just keeps growing and growing year after year. Government just keeps getting bigger, even with conservative legislators like yourself.
Yeah, but I'm in the minority too, so that.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter who's in. Well, it doesn't matter who's in office. They're still going to grow the budget.
Yeah.
So I want
Particularly
to.
and billions are little numbers now when you go
Yeah,
to
right,
Washington.
right.
We're not quite talking trillions at the state level yet. So
We'll get there.
we're still in the $35 billion range for our budget.
So your expertise. I mean, you got a lot of expertise, but you're really good on water. Rio Grande Basin, Colorado River, West. I mean, that's your subject. General manager of the Rio Grande Water Conservation District, and you ask for committee assignments when you're first in the legislature. You asked for certain committees, you didn't get it, and they put you instead on Health and Human Services Committee.
Correct.
Do you have any expertise there? Well, I don't. I'm just
No.
kidding. I'm just kidding on that. But
I don't.
But can you explain to us what that's like for you? You're thrown in the deep end of Health and Human Services, which is a very big topic. I mean, it covers everything. Colorado Department, Public Health and Environment. Mr. Yan is in a conversation about whether or not he wants to adopt a rule from Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment that was adopted. There's all kinds of human health and services, welfare, Medicaid, all these programs, a lot of social programs that come through human health and services. How do you strategically, tactically, how do you get comfortable in that environment and participate on a committee like that where you're having value?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out. When I was notified that was the committee I was going to be serving on, I called my predecessor, Senator Crowder, and said, Larry, I'm on Health and Human Services. This is not my forte at all. I'm out of my element here. And he said, likewise for him, he was appointed to the committee and didn't have background or expertise, but he said, you know, at the end of my term, it was by far the most valuable and rewarding committee he ever served on. So I took that to heart and really dove in and tried to educate myself and work through. I'm fortunate enough to be friends with Michelle Leake, who heads up the Colorado Health Institute, and she provided staff to help educate me, and it really has been and look, again, I'm only 8 or 9 months into it, so it's quite a process, but you touched on it. It covers Medicaid is part of oversight. That committee has oversight over HCPF, health care policy and financing, the biggest portion of the state's budget. So when you look at statistics in Senate District 35, 36% of my constituents are Medicaid recipients. That's twice what the state average is. So it's like, you better figure this out and spend some time. And I touched on it a little bit, but the other statistics that are truly alarming are, suicide rates in rural Colorado, particularly Senate District 35, are disproportionately higher than they are in the rest of the state. Death by overdose are disproportionately higher in these counties than they are the rest of the state. Impacts to families from opioid abuse are disproportionately higher in these 16 rural counties. So it's like I feel compelled to get educated, involved, and see if there isn't a path forward that change that trend and that perspective. And I'd like to tell a story. Sitting in Health and Human Services Committee, we hear a bill called Behavioral Health Transformation Bill. So it's $100 and some million bill with 20 or 30 different components. It's complicated like the transportation bill. And I sat and listened to the proponents and the sponsors talk about the need for behavioral health. And I'm an engineer by trade, and I had a really hard time following all the money and all the different programs. Again, there were so many of them. And for me, the classic one, there's a line item in there for the CSU Agro-Ability Project. It was $900,000. And in testimony, I asked the sponsors, the guys from CSU, how much money are you getting now? And it was like $100,000. So the program was going to grow from $100,000 to $900,000. And offline, I asked the sponsor, how did you come up with, I need to know the sequence, how did you get there? And she just said, well, that's what they said they needed and they wanted. And so I voted against the bill in committee. I could never get comfortable with it. Voted against it. It passed out of committee. And then I come home back to Alamosa and open up the Valley Courier. It wasn't that week, but within a few weeks, I open up the Valley Courier and the headlines are, a young woman takes the life of her 2 elementary school kids and then kills herself. And it was so impactful to me. I sat and thought about that. It said, there has to be something different.
Right.
So I went to the floor and had this exact same conversation and changed my vote on the floor to support the bill. I found it a little hypocritical of me. I sponsored a bill for $30 million for Colorado Water Conservation Board and watershed restoration. I don't know where every one of those dollars goes, but I trust CWCB that they're doing the right thing to make sure those funds go to the right place. And so I found it a little hypocritical and changed my vote and sponsored the bill and said, I'm gonna dig in here and help change the direction that we're headed.
No, that's a great story, and I think that's really illustrative of the difficulty legislators have, Cleave and others, anyone who goes into public office. Lori Lasky sitting in the audience, and she's a friend, and I worked with her at Adams State. She became a county commissioner, and I'm sure she is doing all kinds of homework to figure out how to serve and how to be a county commissioner and understanding the budget and all. So it's hard work, and I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the service that you give to the Valley. But I want to go a little bit deeper here. you're an elected official. Elected officials can get voted out. The staff, though, staff members who work in government, can be city government, county government, state government, federal, the staff, which really is the bureaucracy. Those are the people that, no matter who's in office, they're the ones that keep government moving. They're the ones that keep the services moving forward. And it occurs to me, or seems to me, that we as a society have started to attack the staff. We see it in public health particularly. We see it in schools. We see it in other levels of government where it's the staff, and they're the ones just doing the job. They're public, and they're not paid. And we don't seem to trust government anymore. We don't seem to trust government at any level, local, state, federal. We don't trust the staff to run government anymore. And that's because, I don't know, do you feel that way? I'd feel that way.
Well, maybe very intentionally, I took a different approach going in. Only being there 1 year, now 9 months into this, I kind of recognize those are the folks that can make a difference. Whatever legislation we pass, those are the folks that have to implement the legislation. So I've been very intentional in trying to gauge with each department. Each of them have a legislative liaison that I make sure I know and talk to and can be engaged with. But I watched legislators that have been there for 14 years that probably have become very cynical and have seen a lot more than what I've seen. And I can see that distrust and that sometimes rudeness about the executive branch and the administration. But again, they've been through so much more than I have. I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt to start with and work from that position. So again, to be impactful and to have a change, I need those folks to be as caring and engaged and thoughtful as I think I'm trying to be. Yeah. I'm trying to work with them.
Yeah. And when I mean, as I said at the beginning, you're very thoughtful. You I think are someone that is not the norm these days. You're above that, and we appreciate that. I want to ask if there's any questions in the audience for you, or any questions for Mary Ann that we can address about Alamosa Citizen, or just Mary Ann in general. Because I think you always need to know a little bit more about Mary Ann. So if there's any questions from the audience, just except for Mark.
Oh, Mary Ann, how do you put up with it?
He's a really good kisser.
That was his reputation in high school.
And now Chris is blushing.
I was going to add, I routinely get asked, how's it going? Kathy has asked me all during session, are you having fun? I can honestly tell you it was not fun. It was not fun, but there's this weird paradigm to go, it wasn't fun, but it was really enjoyable. It was stimulating, it was thoughtful. I'm sitting, and I tell this story, sitting in a committee room at the Capitol at 2 o'clock in the morning, debating a bill about prescription drug affordability board, and go, 18 months ago, never in my life would have I envisioned being sitting in a committee room debating something like a prescription drug affordability board. So that part of it has really been rewarding and stimulating. It's mentally exhausting. We had 700 bills introduced. We passed 500 bills. That's just mind-boggling to how, and we don't have staff. I have one part-time aide that helps me and they're trying to learn all the nuances about how do you prepare yourself every day for bills you're going to hear in committee and or on the floor, plus your own bills. Again, I didn't intend to sponsor 20 of them, but I ended up sponsoring and testifying for 20 bills. So it's an exhausting pace, and I have a different appreciation for what folks do at the legislature. Gigi would know that.
Any questions from the audience for Cleave before I throw something else at him? Okay. Let me ask you this. How are you doing? And I say that in context to you're the Rio Grande Water Conservation General, and that's a hell of a job, trying to figure out all the sub-districts, figure out the conservation programs. That in itself is a big job. You run your own farm, you own your own, you farm, you're busy out there in the fields, growing your own hay, you're growing, and you're a legislator. You're a state legislator covering this. How do you do that? How do you do all three things? How are you able to do that?
Mostly with great family support. My dad's here too, so my son helps manage the farm. When I'm not there, and Darius is in the back, he's helpful. The farm has kind of taken over its own self, and Jared and my dad, Darius, keep it going. I have great staff at the Rio Grande Water Conservation District, so it's been a challenge. It's certainly it's been more demanding outside of the session than what I thought it was going to be. So that part of it has been a learning experience, and I've a little bit of it's self-inflicted. I haven't said no to anybody that wants me or my time for some discussion or to go see the Bessemer Ditch in Pueblo, or it's just a laundry list of folks from the Southern High Plains designated basin down in Springfield. So, but I felt like that's the best way to become a better legislator, is to be engaged and see and do as much as I can, particularly in the interim, because again, once the session starts again in January, if we don't have COVID challenges, it'll just be 120 days full on again.
Are you contemplating or thinking through any bills that you're going to bring forward in 2022, and what might those be?
Yeah, so there's one I've actually got. So there are interim committees outside of session that specialize in just a handful of areas, and one of them is water. So we presented to the interim water resources review committee a bill to tap into federal dollars to help with groundwater challenges both here in this basin and in the Republican. So that one I initiated and started, but hopefully the committee will take that one on. There's some about challenges with folks with some special needs, in particular around autism, that I have taken on and working through. And there are a myriad of others. Again, what I'm finding out was I knew about an abundance of these issues, but I didn't really know about them. So veterans issues are really huge, and veterans struggle across the entire state and in our Senate district as well. And again, that incidence of suicide is higher here. So there are veterans issues, water. I have a meeting with the Commissioner of Ag next week to sit down and talk about, all right, what opportunities do we have to strengthen agriculture above and beyond what we did last session? So that I'll end up with, again, limited to 5. I'll have to sort through them and try to figure out which ones I want to present and carry forward.
Yeah, that sounds good. I want to go back to Health and Human Services, because I had someone on our Twitter feed wanting us to ask you about COVID and the response we've seen to COVID. So I'll just lay some statistics out there. 57% Alamosa residents vaccinated, something like that, first shot at least. So a little bit more in the majority, statewide 70-some%. Across the nation, I think it's 78% that have had at least one shot at this point. So that's moving. How do you see the topic at this point of COVID? We've lived with it for a couple of years now. What's your perspective on it?
It's been such a divisive issue that it's unfortunate. I think from the very beginning it was politicized from both ends of the spectrum, and it's been so politicized from the beginning. It's made it a real challenge to come together as communities, as a state, as a nation, and really solve the problem. For me, particularly lately, with all the discussion and the direction from the state about mandated vaccinations, I think that just drives a wedge further and further in us. That it really sets us up. Like, we're going to continue this divisiveness for the immediate future, and I really wish there was a different path forward that was really, again, centered around education and trust. You talked about the mistrust that has developed over, I mean, it's been accelerated over the last decade and even more so over the last 3 or 4 years, but somehow I have aspirations that we can get above and beyond that and come together as communities to really significantly change the direction that we're going, and don't have ICU units that are overwhelmed either by COVID cases, or I think here locally there's a lot of folks that are here that can't be transferred, that not COVID related, but that can't get transferred to other hospitals because of they're overwhelmed by COVID. So I also think the virus has proven to us that we don't understand it well at all. It seems like every turn we change directions thinking we understand it, and I think we're faced with, we're gonna have to figure out how to live with this, because I think it's gonna be here for some period of time. So what does that look like going forward?
Well, let me, so you're again on the committee, you're on the Senate Committee of Human Health and Services. And so you, as a committee member, you get to question staff from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, which has been the state agency that's largely been responsible for rolling out whatever the state COVID strategies are. You get to ask them questions, you get to, what kind of questions would you have or do you have for any state agency like that, or for anyone when it comes to COVID, because you get to ask those questions as a member of that committee.
Yeah, so there weren't very many committee hearings where COVID was of big concern, but I did take the opportunity to talk to Joe Ryan Hunsucker, the executive director of CDPHE, and at that time it was really, for me, it was trying to focus, or why wasn't there more focus on local control? Well, why is this so heavy-handed from the state when local authorities have a better appreciation of their circumstances, and why did it seem like there was no opportunity? This discussion came out as vaccine was being unrolled or rolled out to communities, and CDPHE was given local authorities an abundance of leeway of how to best utilize the vaccines. And I said, but Jill, why don't you apply that same philosophy to shutdowns or to mask mandates, or why aren't local control, why isn't local control more prominent than it is now? And I'm not going to tell you what her response was.
You have any questions on COVID, Marianne? You want to talk to Cleave about human health and services? Okay.
Tell a story. Yes.
Say that again.
I wanted him to share a story about his experience with the committee we did. But he shared with us earlier. I thought that was a good story.
Okay. Questions from the audience for Cleave or for Marianne?
What's for dinner?
Nothing tonight. Nothing tonight because,
Vanessa made cookies.
yes, we don't eat after 7 o'clock. Sorry. Just a rule. I'm going to push back really quick, and again, we're going to end this coming up, but just quickly back on COVID. Most people are vaccinated. Most people got vaccinated. Small minority pushing against it and making a lot of noise around that. Any concerns there?
Well, I don't know concerns. I've been very public about, I think this is a personal choice. I think I've been vaccinated. It was my decision. Don't leave, Kim. I was very intentional about my circumstances, my family, and it was a choice for me. I think mandated vaccinations for me is a demonstration of weaker leadership. To go, the hard path is engaging and educating and continue reminding and convincing. The easy path is just to say, you either get vaccinated or you're no longer employed. I think that's, for me, a bit of want to say cop out, but it's shorting the system and not taking the time and effort to continue to engage and convince. And because it got so politicized 18 months ago, that's a hard rift to solve. But I appreciate people that have said, it's not right for me to force, and this is my perspective as well, to force people to inject a drug into their body that they don't want to. I'm willing to take the time and effort to sit with them and offer my perspective, but ultimately I said, you need to sit with your healthcare provider and figure out what's best for you. Don't listen to Facebook, don't listen to Fox News, don't listen to CNN. Go sit with your healthcare provider, get good information, understand what your circumstances are, and do what's best for you.
Cool. Okay, so AlamosaCitizen.com wants to do events like this routinely where we bring public officials like Cleave. Mayor Coleman was here, he left. We want to get Mayor Coleman. We just want to engage with public officials on behalf of the community, on behalf of the public, and we want to invite people into these types of sessions so you can listen to Cleave. And if you want to ask him a question, we think that's what civic journalism is about, is bringing people forward like this, having little events like this, so you can hear from him directly. And that's what we want to try to do. We have another event coming up on October 28th. We're going to invite Jeff Roberts, another old friend of mine from the Denver Post. Jeff is the director of the Colorado Freedom of Information Office. He's going to come down here on October 28th. We're going to have another little community event, and we're going to learn about public records and how you make a request for a public document from the state of Colorado or from the county of Alamosa or from a school district. What are public documents? What are public records? How do you make those requests? How do you go access your government? That's what Jeff's going to do when we come down here. When he comes down on October 28th, we'll put that out. We hope you'll come by and listen to Jeff and learn a little bit about public records. Before we break up tonight, I want to do a couple of really quick introductions of some great people who have been helping Alamosa Citizen as we've been trying to get going and building a little source of information for the San Luis Valley. I want to introduce Maddie Allhorn, who's sitting right here. And Owen Woods. Vanessa Sullivan in the back has been helping us bring events together. Dylan Milner has been helping create videos for us and is working with us. So when we talked about the job loss in journalism and 3,000, about 28% of the workforce has lost jobs from 2008 present. And I can tell you, it was before that because I was laying people off around 2004 at newspaper. I was working in California. We started to lay staff off around 2004. So that job loss is a little bit deeper. But the digital publishers, like AlamosaCitizen.com, have been adding jobs back into that workforce. Alamosa Citizen has hired 3 people. We actually have 3 employees now. Marianne's really having to do some of that now. So we actually have hired 3 people. So that's kind of a cool thing that we brought some jobs forward in our little operation of what we're trying to do. We'll know soon if this thing has a business revenue stream to it. That's what we're going to figure out next. Everything about Alamosa Citizen comes out of our pocket. We have 0 investors. We have no one to answer to except Marianne and I. We're putting all our own money into this project to make it go, to see if we can create a digital source of information for the San Luis Valley. We're going to figure out if we can ask people to pay for that service or not. And that's the beauty of what we're trying to do, is we can see the data, we can see who comes to us. We know we've seen, since we've been alive, on August 8th, we've been over 20,000 page views. That's just people coming to the website, reading something on the website, creating an impression. So we've had about 20,000 impressions to our website. We've had about 5,000 people come to AlamosaCitizen.com since August 8th to read or to consume some of the work that we've done. If we can get a fraction of that 5,000 to turn into a paying member, for Alamosa Citizen to help us pay for our work and the individuals that we are growing into becoming journalists, becoming media people, that would be great. So with that, we will close it down for the night. We're grateful to Cleave for coming out tonight, to Senator Simpson for coming out tonight and spending some time with us this evening. And we thank you all for coming out in this evening too.
Yeah, thank you all very much. It's a pleasure.